Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Murder with a View by Diane Kelly, narrated by Courtney Patterson. Chapter 1. Auction Action. Whitney Whitaker. It was barely sun-up on a day in the middle of May when I was wakened by the sensation of my fluffy, buff-colored cat head-butting my cheek with his furry forehead. Who needs an alarm clock when you've got a cat to tell you when it's time to wake up? With a yawn and a sigh, I opened my eyes. Seeing that his efforts had been successful, my cat revved his motor and launched into a loud purr meant to further encourage me. I reached out my hand to pet my furry fellow. "All right, Sawdust. Mommy will get up and get your breakfast." Sawdust trotted along next to me as I made my way out into the hall. On hearing our footsteps, my roommate's long-haired calico kitten came skittering out of her bedroom at warp speed to join us. In her zealousness, the kitty overshot her mark, bouncing off the opposite wall like a fuzzy pinball. Fortunately, she was no worse for the wear. I led them to the kitchen, split a can of flaked tuna between them, and gave them both a nice scratch behind the ears. "You two behave yourselves today," I admonished them. "I'm off to buy some real estate." Later that morning, my cousin Buck and I walked into the Davidson County Courthouse with a spring in our steps, big ideas in our heads, and a certified check for $95,000 in my purse. Having spent much of our childhood together, Buck and I were as close-knit as siblings. We looked like siblings, too, sharing blonde hair, blue eyes, and a tall stature. Buck's father, my Uncle Roger, ran a carpentry business and had taught us both the ins and outs of woodworking when we were young. We'd started off building birdhouses, later graduated to dog houses, and these days we'd partnered to flip houses for human inhabitants. We'd recently earned a nice profit on the sale of a 3-bedroom, 2-bath colonial we'd purchased and remodeled. We planned to plunk that profit down on another property and see if we could double or maybe even triple it. Flipping houses was a risky venture, though, like real estate roulette. But we had nothing to lose, unless you counted our money, our solid credit ratings, and our confidence in ourselves. I chose not to. The property we'd set our sights on this time was, ironically, not much to look at. The abandoned one-story motel dated back to the 1960s, when men with mutton-chop sideburns and women with bouffant hairdos pulled into the place in their Chevy Chevelles, Plymouth Barracudas, or Ford Fairlanes. Currently, the place sported seafoam green stucco and scratched pink doors, along with plastic tarps and plywood. Years had passed since anyone had paid taxes on the place, slept in its beds, or swum in its now cracked pool. But with my mental crystal ball, I could envision the 12 motel rooms turned into 6 one-bedroom condominiums, with contemporary conveniences and a charming retro facade that incorporated the guitar-shaped neon sign in the parking lot. With the property's prime location just across the Cumberland River from downtown Nashville, we could earn a huge gain, assuming we were the highest bidders at today's tax auction. We checked in with the clerk at a table outside the room where the auction would be held. "Name?" she asked, looking up at my cousin and me. I spoke for us. "Whitney and Buck Whitaker." She wrote our names down on a sheet of paper and held out a numbered paddle. "Here you go." I eyed the paddle. Number 13. Call me superstitious, but I got a bad vibe. "Any chance we could get a paddle with a different number?" The woman eyed the line forming behind us and sent me a sour look. "No, sorry." Buck pushed me forward into the courtroom and muttered, "You get what you get and you don't throw a fit." "I wasn't throwing a fit," I said. "I just don't want to be jinxed." But jinxed we appeared to be. There, in the front row, sat Thaddeus Gentry III. Even from behind, I recognized his stocky physique and thick, wolf-like salt-and-pepper hair. His lupine resemblance didn't end at his hair, either. He was a predator, slinking around the city as if it were his territory, searching for unsuspecting prey. Thad Gentry owned Gentry Real Estate Development Incorporated, referred to as Greed Incorporated by those who disliked his tactics, including yours truly. Gentry was a ruthless real estate developer who swooped down on older, unsuspecting neighborhoods and rebuilt them, running off long-term residents in the process. Rather than rehabbing run-down areas in modest and affordable ways that would allow residents to remain, he strategically purchased plots, razing old homes and building new, bigger upscale houses in their stead. Older homes would end up sandwiched between his expensive new structures, which caused lot values to soar. The neighbors would find themselves unable to pay the increased property taxes on homes they'd lived in for decades. Gentry would buy them out when they were forced to put the homes they could no longer afford on the market. Buck and I had a much different philosophy about real estate. While we were in the house-flipping business to make a living, profits were not our sole concern. Our focus was on providing a safe, well-constructed, and visually appealing residence for the people who would someday call it home. The two of us also enjoyed the artistry involved in revisualizing an outdated eyesore, as well as the simple satisfaction that comes from physical labor. Not long ago, Gentry and I had butted heads when he'd purchased the house next door to the one in which I now live. He'd attempted to have the adjacent property rezoned from residential to commercial, which would have caused the value of my house to plummet. He'd been suspected of bribing a member of the zoning commission, then settling the matter to prevent the truth from coming to light. I'd managed to beat him then, but could I beat him now? It was doubtful. Our funds were limited. Gentry's, on the other hand, were limitless. I elbowed Buck in the ribs to get his attention and jerked my head to indicate Gentry. Rubbing his side, Buck followed my gaze and frowned. He knew why Gentry was here. For the same reason we were, to put in a bid on the Music City Motor Court. Although the land on which the motel sat was a mere half-acre, its location and skyline view made it a potential gold mine. Buck and I slipped into the back row and put our heads together. "We can't let Thad Gentry steal this chance from us," I whispered. "How can we stop him?" Buck asked. I bit my lip and raised my palms. Buck's eyes narrowed as he thought. "You think the Hartleys would make you another loan?" Marv and Wanda Hartley owned Home and Hearth Realty, the real estate company where I worked part-time as a property manager. They'd generously loaned me the funds to buy the Colonial that Buck and I had recently flipped. They'd give me another loan if I asked, but I'd really hoped the arrangement would be a one-time thing, that Buck and I would be able to buy another property on our own this time, without help. My parents would gladly loan me some money, too, as would Buck's. But with me having reached the big 3-0 and Buck being on the backside of 30, we were getting a little too old to run to Mom and Dad for money. We earned decent livings and could support ourselves, even save a little. But if we couldn't manage this on our own, maybe we were trying to bite off more than we could chew. Before I could respond, the courtroom doors opened, and in walked Presley Pearson, on a pair of 4-inch heels. Designer, no doubt, though I'd be hard-pressed to identify any footwear brand not sold at Tractor Supply, where I purchased the steel-toed work boots I wore when making repairs at rental properties or helping out in the family carpentry business. Presley was smart and chic, with a short, angular haircut that framed her dark-skinned face. Presley could be the solution to our problem, if she didn't still hold a grudge against me. She and I had a checkered past. I'd bought my current home from her former boss, and she'd been rightfully upset that he hadn't offered the house to her first. But by the time I'd learned she was interested in the property, the deal was done. Her boss was later found dead in the front flower bed, so she'd dodged a proverbial bullet. Buck and I were now stuck with the unmarketable house. Nobody wants to buy a property where a person was murdered. Not without an enormous discount, anyway. I stood and raised a hand to stop her. "Presley, hi." She turned my way and her face tightened. A reflexive action, I supposed. "Hello, Whitney," she said in a tepid tone. "We'd like to talk to you." Buck stood, too, arching a brow. "We would?" "Trust me," I whispered to him. I held out a hand to invite Presley to sit next to me and Buck on the bench. Once we were all sitting, I asked, "Which property are you planning to bid on?" She kept her cards close to her vest and turned the tables on me. "Why don't you tell me first?" Unlike her, I exposed my hand. "The Music City Motor Court." Her face sunk as she realized she had competition for the property she'd hoped to purchase. I angled my head to indicate the front row. "See Thad Gentry up there? I have a hunch he's here to bid on the motel, too." She eyed the man and sighed. "Gentry Development is flush with capital. There's no way I could beat his bid." "Neither can we," I said. "Not alone, anyway. But if we pooled our resources?" She stared at me for a long moment, evidently engaged in a mental debate with herself, before asking, "How much were you going to bid?" $95,000. "You?" $68," she said. "It's all my savings." Now, $163,000 would be chump change to Gentry, and we all knew it. Fortunately, a devious idea popped into my mind. I gave Presley a quick overview of our plans for the property, assuming we were lucky enough to land it. "Condos?" she said. "That's a fantastic idea. They'd go fast and for a high price, too." She's in. I looked from Presley to Buck. "Are you two above pulling a fast one?" Presley scoffed. "On Thad Gentry? Heck no. He's a pompous you-know-what." "So you've dealt with him, too?" It wasn't surprising that Presley and Gentry would have interacted at some point. After all, Presley's former boss and Gentry were two major players in the Nashville real estate scene. "He came to the office once," Presley said, "but he didn't even glance in my direction. I've only spoken with him on the phone. He was always rude and pushy." Good. The fact that she hadn't dealt with him in person meant he wouldn't recognize her. He wasn't likely to recognize Buck, either. As for myself, that was another matter. Thad Gentry and I had a run-in at our properties a while back, and there was no love lost between us. He'd probably recognize me, and he certainly wouldn't trust me. We put our heads together and came up with a plan. Even after a property has been auctioned off in a tax sale, the county does not issue the winning bidder a valid deed until the expiration of the applicable redemption period. During the redemption period, the delinquent owner could redeem the property by reimbursing the purchase price paid by the bidder, as well as the delinquent taxes, penalties, interest, and court costs. Purchasing a property that was likely to be redeemed was a waste of time and would tie up funds that could be better invested elsewhere. If we could convince Gentry the motel was at risk of being redeemed, maybe he'd decide not to take a chance on it. Buck took our number 13 paddle, and he and Presley headed to the second row, taking seats behind Gentry. I, on the other hand, slid down to the end of the back row and slouched, doing my best to make myself invisible. As the room continued to fill with people interested in placing bids in the tax auction, Buck and Presley made what appeared to be idle conversation, but that was actually full of fibs about the property. Though I was too far away to actually hear their discussion, based on our sneaky plan, I knew it went something like this. Buck: "No point in bidding on the Music City Motor Court. I met the owners when I was checking out the property yesterday. They're pulling funds together to redeem it." Presley: "Are you sure?" Buck: "Yep. Their new investors were with them. A couple of wealthy guys from Chicago. Flew down on their own private jet. Anyone who bids on that property is a chump. I've set my sights on that parcel off Lebanon Pike. There's an old farmhouse and barn on it now, but apartments are sprouting up all around that area. It's just a matter of time until a developer comes a-callin'." Gentry turned his head slightly, clearly listening in on Buck and Presley's conversation. But if he overheard something they said and took it to heart, that was his problem, not ours. He shouldn't be eavesdropping on a private conversation. A few minutes later, the room was full and the auction began. Several smaller houses sold before the auctioneer announced that the next property up for bid would be the one along Lebanon Pike. Several bidders raised their paddles, including both Gentry and Buck, who was toying with the tycoon. Others dropped out as the price went up. The auctioneer continued to raise the price by $5,000 increments until Buck bailed out at $80,000. As Gentry raised his paddle one last time, the auctioneer brought his gavel down.
Sold for $85,000 to bidder number 8.
Gentry cut a smug look back at Buck, who shook his head in pretend disappointment. I fought the urge to laugh out loud. Gentry was a smart man, but he was also a fiercely competitive one who didn't like to lose. He shouldn't have been so hasty. He'd just bought a worthless piece of land in the Mill Creek floodplain. Before it could be developed, expensive grading and flood control improvements would have to be made. Sucker. His business concluded, Gentry stood and left the room to finalize the paperwork in the clerk's office down the hall. The auctioneer announced the legal description of the next parcel of land, then said,
Otherwise known as the Music City Motor Court.
When he started the bidding, a dozen paddles shot into the air. Darn! Looked like we weren't the only ones who realized the property's potential. Buck raised his paddle over and over as the price went from $100,000 to $110,000 to $120,000. About half of the bidders dropped out at that price, but several remained. The bid went to $130,000, then $140,000, and $150,000. By then, only Buck and another man were still in the game. My intestines tied themselves in knots. We wanted this property. Bad, and it looked like we might lose it. The auctioneer raised the bid by only $5,000 this time around.
Do I hear $155,000?
We had only $8,000 more to go before we'd have to drop out. Arrgh! I crossed my fingers. For good measure, I crossed my toes, too. Not easy to do in steel-toed boots. Buck hesitated a moment before raising his paddle, a strategy to make the other bidder think twice about further raising his bid. Seeing the hesitation of the remaining bidders, the auctioneer increased the bid by a smaller amount.
Do I hear $158,000?
Both Buck and the other bidder waited a moment before Buck slowly raised his paddle. The other man did likewise. I fought the urge to scream. I'd already visualized exactly what we could do to the property, had jotted down notes and sketched out some ideas. This man was screwing around with my plans, and I didn't like it one bit.
Do I hear $160,000?
The auctioneer's head swiveled as he looked from Buck to the other bidder. The other bidder raised his paddle and sent a scathing look in Buck's direction. Buck raised his paddle as well.
Can I get $162,500?
The auctioneer called, his eyes wide with anticipation. The other man exhaled sharply, frowned in defeat, and shook his head. He'd reached his limit. Buck raised both his paddle and a victorious fist as the auctioneer brought his gavel down.
Sold to bidder number 13.
Maybe 13 wasn't such an unlucky number after all. We even had $500 left over. Buck and Presley stood and made their way down the aisle, both of them beaming. I met them at the door, giddy over our win. We did it! I held up a hand and exchanged high fives with my cousin and our new business partner. I only hoped we could all work well together. Buck and I had developed a system. Adding another person to the mix could complicate things, but we'd cross that bridge if and when we came to it. We headed down the hall to the clerk's office and stepped up to the counter beside Thad Gentry. He did a double-take when he recognized me. I gave him my best smile. He frowned and turned away. The matronly clerk took the approved bid from Buck and said, "You bought the Music City Motor Court, huh? I stayed there once back in the day. Got sunburnt out by the pool. Had a fun time, though." Gentry's head had snapped in our direction when he overheard the woman mention the hotel. His eyes narrowed as he looked from me to Buck and back again, seeming to notice the family resemblance. I offered him a smug smile. "Didn't your mama tell you not to trust in rumors?" The man skewered me with his gaze and chuckled mirthlessly.
Well played, Miss Whitaker.
Well played, indeed. Thad Gentry might not like me, but at least now he respected me. Chapter 2. Site Visit. Whitney. Buck, Presley, and I decided to celebrate over an early lunch at a cafe near the courthouse. I ordered a bottle of Prosecco, a more affordable alternative to champagne. We'd spring for champagne later, once we'd sold the units. I held up my glass. To a successful partnership. Buck and Presley clinked their glasses against mine, and we all took a sip. After toasting our good fortune with sparkling wine, we worked out the particulars of our arrangement over our meal. Presley looked from me to Buck. "Tell me more specifics about your plans." I told her that we planned to improve the grounds, renovate the exterior, and finish out one spec model before tackling the additional units. Once the spec unit is ready to show, we'll pre-sale the other units and use the down payments to finance the completion work. "Smart," she said. "That way our upfront expenses are minimized." Fortunately, Presley agreed to leave the details of the renovation up to my cousin and me. "I don't like to get my hands dirty. I'll come by to check on things now and then, but for the most part I'll be a silent partner." Recognizing that, in addition to our monetary investment, Buck and I would invest sweat equity by performing much of the construction work ourselves, she agreed to accept 30% of the net profit as full payment for her share in the venture, with payment due upon sale of the last condominium unit. We jotted the details on a napkin, signed our names to it, and sealed the deal with handshakes. An attorney would cringe at our lackadaisical approach, but if Presley was going to trust Buck and me to do a good job on the remodel, I'd trust her to keep up her end of the bargain, too. After enjoying our meal, Presley dabbed at her mouth, lay her napkin on the table, and sat back in her seat, eyeing me. "If someone had told me yesterday that you and I would end up partners in a real estate deal, I would have told them they were crazy." "We might have gotten off on the wrong foot," I said, "but you and I are a lot alike." It was true. We were both ambitious and determined, with an affinity for realty. "Cat people, you mean?" The glimmer in her eye said she was being facetious, but she nonetheless pulled out her cell phone and showed me several pics of an orange tabby she called Tangerine. The adoring way she looked at the photos told me she felt the same way about her cat as I did about mine. "She's beautiful." "Isn't she, though?" She returned her phone to her purse. "How's your little guy? Sawdust, right?" This sounded like an invitation to reciprocate with kitty pics of my own. I retrieved my phone and showed her photos of Sawdust with Cleo. "He's got a new little buddy. She follows him everywhere, like a calico shadow." Buck joined in, too. There'd been 3 cats in Sawdust's litter, born to a stray in my Uncle Roger's and Aunt Nancy's barn. Sawdust had been the runt. While my aunt and uncle kept the mama cat, Sawdust ended up with me, and his 2 siblings had gone to Buck and his brother Owen. My cousin held up his phone, his enormous tomcat filling the screen. "This guy lives with me." Buck jokingly referred to his cat as his roommate, and insisted the 2 were confirmed bachelors. Lately, though, I'd sensed Buck's commitment to his bachelor status waning. After lunch, Presley headed off to her job, while Buck and I swung by the motel to prioritize our to-do list. The property sat on North First Street, not far from the sprawling football stadium where the Tennessee Titans played. The dilapidated inn was also within walking distance of the pedestrian bridge that spanned the Cumberland River. The bridge connected the east side of the river to downtown Nashville and the South Broadway tourist area. Sobro, as locals called it, encompassed a variety of restaurants, shops, and honky-tonks, as well as the Predators hockey rink, the Country Music Hall of Fame, and the Ryman Auditorium, where the Grand Ole Opry had been launched decades ago. The location would appeal to well-heeled singles or couples who enjoyed the downtown scene. We parked on the street beside the L-shaped motel and stood side by side on the sidewalk, looking through the flimsy wire fencing that had been erected to keep people off the property. The asphalt parking lot was cracked, the rooftop HVAC units were rusty, and colorful graffiti decorated the pocked seafoam green stucco exterior. Faded curtains hung askew in what few windows hadn't been covered with plywood or plastic tarps. All sorts of trash lay scattered about. Fast food and candy wrappers, soda cans, broken beer bottles, cigarette butts, both with and without telltale lines of lipstick encircling the filter. The seedy motel was a far cry from the Ritz-Carlton, but with some hard work, we'd transform this derelict lodge into a place anyone would be proud to call home.
"First thing we do," Buck said, "is get that sign fixed."
He pointed to the guitar-shaped neon sign.
"We light that up and people will be curious about what's going on over here. Start talking about it."
"Can't hurt to generate some buzz," I agreed. "Maybe we should string up a banner, too, one that says, 'Coming soon, Music City Motor Court Condominiums.'"
"Good idea."
We circled around the parking lot, and Buck reached down to lift up a loose edge of the flimsy wire fencing. We bent down and ducked under the flap to access the property. As he let the fencing fall back into place, he said,
"We'll have to find a better way to secure this place. That lightweight chain link isn't going to cut it."
The bent fencing, the graffiti on the building, and the broken windows evidenced vandals having come onto the property. We'd have to do something to keep trespassers out. We couldn't afford to have our building materials stolen or someone getting hurt on the premises and filing a lawsuit. I made a suggestion. "What if we install decorative iron fencing around the place? It'll be useful now, and prospective buyers will like the added security, too." Not that we were going for snob appeal, but the gate would also add an air of exclusivity. Buck cocked his head.
"You got a guy who will install a fence at a reasonable rate?"
"Of course I got a guy," I said. "I always got a guy." Working as a property manager, I knew more than my share of people in the construction and repair trades. Plumbers, electricians, flooring installers, fencing specialists, painters and landscapers, too. My contacts came in handy in our house-flipping business. Many of the contractors would cut me a good deal in return for sending business their way. The funky smell wafting from the green guck at the bottom of the cracked swimming pool reminded me we'd need a pool guy, too. I pointed this out to Buck. If we waited too much longer, those things wriggling and writhing in the muck might grow into full-sized swamp creatures.
"Well, then, you'll fit right in," teased Buck, though he nodded to show he knew this should be a priority.
As we proceeded along the walkway in front of the rooms, Buck stopped in front of the door to room 9, which sported plywood over its windows. Buck pointed to the door. The metal was bent around the lock.
"Someone took a crowbar to this frame."
He reached out a hand and pushed the door open. Sunlight streamed from behind us into the room, casting our shadows across the place. Dirt specks sparkled within the bright beams like magic fairy dust. As our eyes adjusted, we peeked into the space to see a red Kawasaki motorcycle with studded faux leather saddlebags parked on the far side of the king-sized bed, a book lying open and face down on the nearest nightstand, and a sizable lump under the worn covers. An instant later, the lump sat up, becoming a 40-something man with shaggy brown hair, a burly beard, and a smile as bright as the sunlight.
"Good morning, folks."
Instinctively, I took a step back. 2 thoughts ran through my mind. The first was, this guy sure does wake up happy. The second was, what the heck is he doing here? One glance about the room answered the second question for me. The man was living here. A bottle of water, a tube of toothpaste, and a toothbrush sat on the pink Formica bathroom countertop that spanned half of the back wall. Fast food wrappers filled the plastic trash can. A stack of clean, folded clothing lay atop the other nightstand, which also featured an old-fashioned coin-operated vibrating bed massager. Buck and I exchanged a glance. I was so taken aback, I wasn't sure what to say. Luckily, Buck handled the matter. "I'm Buck," he said, responding to the man in a similarly friendly manner. He hiked a thumb at me. "This is my cousin Whitney. As you can see, I got the looks in the family. She got the karate skills." Karate? While I'd sawed many a board in half over my years in carpentry, I had none of the skills needed to break a board in half with a chop of my hand or a kick of my foot. But maybe Buck's bluff would discourage the guy.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?